I'll do this when there's 10 minutes left, when we're going to the
Yep.
Q&A.
Yep. But you're not.
You're live.
You ready? Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to the Bethlehem Conference for Pastors and Leaders. We're here in Minnesota. My name is Jerry McFarland. I'm the Dean of Students for Online Learning here at Westminster Theological Seminary. We have approximately 300 students around the world, and we offer 2 online programs, one in biblical counseling and one in theological studies. But we're here today to interview Dr. Brandon Crowe, one of our professors at Westminster in the New Testament, on a recent book that he's published called Everyday Matters. It's a very practical book on dealing with the daily demands of life and being organized in that way. But I thought it would be good to introduce Dr. Crowe in a way that he would tell us a little bit more about himself. First of all, how long you've been teaching at Westminster and how you got there, and also perhaps something you enjoy about teaching at that level at Westminster Seminary.
Thanks, Jerry. So I've been at Westminster for 10 and a half years. And I'm from Alabama, and I went to college there, went to seminary in Florida, did a PhD overseas in Scotland at the University of Edinburgh, and did that in New Testament. And so I teach New Testament and related classes at Westminster. And one of the nice things about teaching at Westminster is, I think I would point to 2 things. One is the chance to train pastors, those who are going to be applying the text.
Right.
And not just talking about the text theoretically, but they're actually going to do something with it. And then the other thing that's nice about teaching at a theological seminary is the ability to integrate various disciplines, which again is sort of a practical application of the New Testament. Is you're looking at the way it relates to preaching, the way it relates to theology, the way it relates to the orthodoxy and heresy throughout church history and so forth. And so the ability to move between disciplines and understand the implications that the New Testament has for the other related disciplines as well.
Right.
I think that's a real positive thing about a seminary.
Yeah. Wonderful. And it's always exciting too, I think, when our theologians also want to write about some practical things in life. And so this book really is not necessarily a New Testament book, but it's also a book that comes out of your own convictions and concerns about practical daily living. And it's, to me, it's a very exciting kind of endorsement to that important balance in life and ministry. This book, entitled Everyday Matters, is that double entendre that the title itself kind of catches your attention. I wonder if you could share a little bit about that title and why you decided to write the book in the first place. What prompted you to do that?
Yeah, so the title, this is a phrase that I came across or came up with, or I don't know where it came from, but I have a little plaque on my desk that says Everyday Matters. I had it there for years. And it's kind of, as you say, a double entendre. It means that every day is important. And so you have these big plans in the future sometimes you think about. You think about what could be, or you think about the way you're going to make a difference in this or that way. And tomorrow never comes.
Right.
All you have is today. And so Everyday Matters, on the one hand, means that each day is significant. Live in the day. Take advantage of the day. And if you want to change the world, well, start today. You know, take care of those around you and invest in them. And the other side of the double entendre is it's the small thing. It's the everyday matters, the little matters of everyday life. And so how do you, for example, make progress towards a big goal? You don't just do a big thing in a day. You do a little bit every day. You know, if you want to write a book, you don't write a book in a day. You write a paragraph. You know, and it's you make the decision to set aside an hour today, and you work for an hour on however much it is. And it's not just those sorts of tasks, but it's the way you have fellowship with God, the way that you pursue spiritual disciplines, and the decisions you make every day, they all add up, they all matter. And so every day is important, and it's the little matters of everyday life that really is, those are the places where life is lived.
Yeah, so every day is critically important if you really understand that no day is insignificant in what you do with it. So, yeah, I love the title, by the way. I just think it's a great thing to capture what am I doing with my days and why are they so important. And I think that leads us in a good segue into your book itself. You've written the book with those three categories of perspectives, principles, and practices that you want to kind of develop that philosophy in such a way that it really can be applied well. In that first section on perspectives, you mentioned the importance of balance and tension that exists between particularly the book of Proverbs, some of the wisdom that comes out of that, and then Ecclesiastes, which is fascinating to me in regards to work and productivity. I wonder if you can talk to us more about that. That's just a rich kind of tension and balance with those two passages, those two books.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm trying to do is not only give the practical, but also some of the theological,
right.
A little bit more of the biblical perspective on how we ought to think about these things, and not assume that people already know that, and try to tease it out maybe in some new ways as well. And so if you want to look at two pillars, as it were, in the Old Testament, you start with creation, and so I'm assuming that we're starting with the goodness of creation, the goodness of work. God created these things. But if you want some practical advice for how to be productive, Proverbs gives a lot of help. Proverbs tells us that, well, it starts with the fear of the Lord, remembering that we are not in charge, that God is. He speaks, we listen, and we must live our lives according to His law. And then when it comes to applying that law on a daily basis, Proverbs gives us a lot of help with the gray areas. So, for example, Proverbs talks about the correlation between the outcomes that you're looking for and the work you put in. In other words, if you want to eat, you have to work. You know, if you want to reap a harvest, you have to sow the seed. You have to do the work on the front end if you want to be rewarded on the back end. And so I think of Proverbs kind of as a baseline. Proverbs says the results are tethered to what you do. And so if you want a good outcome, you have to work. And Proverbs talks about planning for your work. You have to think ahead. But even as you think ahead, you must remember that though you plan your way, the Lord directs your steps. And so that's part of the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Understanding that whatever plans we make, they're only provisional. We don't know the future. And so as we plan, we must do so in light of God's lordship and His sovereignty. At the same time, there can be so much planning that you never take action. So some passages in Proverbs tell you to avoid daydreaming and never getting to work, but instead at some point you have to get moving. You have to take action. And so it's all about, Proverbs is all for planning and thinking ahead and strategizing, but it also warns us against over-strategizing, over-planning, and not getting to work. So one of the insights of Proverbs is get to work and get moving. And avoid silly excuses. You know, there's a lion in the road, it's going to eat me. Well, I mean, anything is possible. But the danger of that on a daily basis, you know, is not extremely high. And so what you have are people making excuses about what could be instead of just getting to work. So there's Proverbs. It's a baseline. It provides a standard, not a formulaic approach, but what you ought to expect. You get in, you get out what you put in. Ecclesiastes is also in that realm of wisdom literature, and if you've studied Ecclesiastes, you know how much difference of opinion there is on it. I'm convinced that Ecclesiastes does give us a biblical, proper, accurate, and trustworthy perspective on life, but it's not the last word. And so Ecclesiastes agrees with Proverbs, saying, work hard, work diligently, be diligent in your labors, but it also recognizes the limits of our work. So, one of the limits is no matter how hard you work, your life will come to an end and people will forget your work. And no matter how hard you work or how much you prepare, you will be frustrated. No matter how hard you work, you'll never get it all done. And so part of the insight of Ecclesiastes is take a step back from work. Don't spend all of your life at work. Enjoy those around you. Have a nice meal. Enjoy your family. Take a vacation. Don't just hoard your money. Use it on good things that God has given us and enjoy the gifts. This is a gift from God. And so you have Proverbs telling us to be diligent, to work hard, to recognize that you get out of it what you put in. But Ecclesiastes says sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes people who don't put anything in, they get to reap the harvest. And this is a balance to warn us against, I think, overwork and to encourage us to live in the moment and to enjoy the good gifts that God gives us.
That's a good explanation of that tension of we need to plan and work hard, but we also should be surprised that things don't always work out that we planned for. But it also brings up that issue of the whole issue of productivity. Why does it matter to God that we seek to be productive? And again, how do you balance that without being obsessed with that, but yet being convicted? I really have to do something. I can't just go to either extreme.
Well, I think this is where the New Testament can help us maybe resolve some of that tension that we have there. The tension never goes away, but whereas the author of Ecclesiastes says, English translations, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Right. I'm not sure that vanity is the best translation of the Hebrew there. It may be fleeting or absurd, meaning it doesn't make sense, or temporary, fleeting, something like that. But when you turn to the New Testament, Paul discusses labor quite a bit. And he discusses it from a number of angles. He discusses the need, on the one hand, echoing wisdom literature, if a man wants to eat, let him work. You know, and if a person doesn't work, then that's, well, to paraphrase, very bad. And so you have Paul encouraging us to work and not to be so spiritual that we neglect the actual needs of life. That's actually not spiritual at all. And he also provides a model with his own life to say work is important. Look at what I'm doing. He was a tent maker or a leather worker, and in some places he went, he would do that. He was an apostle, but he would show the value of work in what he was doing, and he would command it. But he also has these theological reflections on the value of work, like in 1 Corinthians 15, for example. In light of who Christ is, in light of the resurrection from the dead, nothing is ultimately in vain. And so, on the one hand, Paul is very clear that there's nothing we can do, praise God, to earn our salvation. There's nothing you can, no matter how productive you are, Ecclesiastes reminds us that's it's not sufficient. It's going to pass away. And so we're not saved based on what we can do. At the same time, our works matter. In light of the resurrection, nothing is in vain, because even death itself is redeemed through Christ. And so Paul gives us a pattern for work. He shows us that giving attention to the everyday matters of life, as it were, is necessary, and it's spiritual to take care of those around you. But it's also encouraging to see that no matter how small or insignificant it seems, the Lord sees and the Lord rewards. And think about Jesus as well. He says, you know, you could go pray on the street corner and people will see you, and that's your reward. Or you can go pray in secret. And God who sees in secret will reward you. And that's that same principle at work.
It's just refreshing to hear you discuss. You're bringing in that richness of the theological training that you're about, but it's richly involved in the practical outworking of that. And it's not one or the other. It's the richness of implying this has all got to work together so that every day matters, whatever I do. And I think that leads to your second category in your book. You write about some principles of the importance of thinking through some practical principles of life to make every day matter. And one of the questions I was thinking about is many people find themselves juggling multiple responsibilities and priorities, families, church, school, work, all of that. How do you counsel me? Someone's excited about hearing what you're saying, Dr. Crowe, but they're thinking right away, what advice, how would you help me in approaching either of these categories with some sense of excellence and competency? I can do this. Well, how do you answer that?
Yeah, and that's really why I tried to write something that would hopefully be helpful. I don't know if I answered this question earlier. Why did I write the book? Having been teaching at a seminary for over a decade now, this is the #1 prayer request I get from students in our weekly prayer group is, how do I manage my time? It's something like that. How do I get it all done? And students are working hard, and they're busy, and they have competing responsibilities, and the workload is heavy. And so it's hard, and I've been there, and you've got to figure out a way to try to, how do you get it all done? What do you do?
Right.
And, well, maybe I'll start with this. The short answer is you can't get it all done. So there's one place to start. There's Ecclesiastes in practice. You can't do it all. You're going to have to say no to some things. Even those things might be good. You're going to have to figure out timelines, what needs to be done, where are your areas, your highest areas of responsibility, your most imminent deadlines. You're going to have to get some clarity in these places. So to start off with, remember you can't say yes to everything. It's just not possible. And so you're going to have to cut some things off. And then you're going to have to get clarity with what are your areas that you have to get done, your areas of responsibility. And this is where it's really helpful, as simple as it sounds, to start writing things down. And just write them down and try to, as the theologians say, brain dump. That's the technical term. Brain dump it all on paper and just start writing things down and trying to get some kind of clarity from the jumble sometimes that's in our heads. And what you need to start thinking through is okay, where am I responsible in life? What do I have to get done? Who am I responsible for?
Right.
And start to write them down. And then you might assign in the lay of the land where you are. And then you're going to have to figure out a way to get all of that material in the right spot so you can see it and that it's helpful. So you're going to have some kind of an organizational system. Probably you're going to be a calendar. It's probably going to be some sort of a filing system and probably some sort of a to-do list.
Right.
And I talk about various ways to do that in the book, but those are the sort of places you're going. So the principle is get it on paper and get it organized the best you can according to what you're already doing and know you should be doing, and then begin to start to move things around like a puzzle and see if you can organize it in some sort of a flow.
I'm intrigued by the fact that you talk about writing things down in a digital age where let's do it all in our electronic things, let's just file it away somewhere, but you're also saying first write it down, have it in front of you. Why that? Why?
Well, yeah, even if you move away from that, I think there's something helpful about the physical act of writing it down. And you know, we could have another conversation another day about the way that when you write things down, you process it differently than when you type it.
Wow.
And this is why so many studies have said you're going to learn better in the classroom if you're writing things down by hand, because you're having to process it and think about what to write and be selective in what you include, versus trying to write down every word, which you could do, but it doesn't register in the same way. And so probably for most people, electronic tools are just going to be the way they move, but having the flexibility also to, at least at the early stages, to write it down, and maybe include that as part of your workflow will be really helpful. My personal way to go is a combination, which is I write things down by hand for some things, and I use electronic means for other things. And so at the outset, though, it may be helpful to write it down so then you know where electronically to put it and make sure you got it in the right place. But it also is a way that you can stay focused, maybe put your computer away and your phone away and just look at the paper and get everything out that you need to have out, and then you can begin to organize it and put it in the proper place.
That's kind of what I hear you saying, which there's an advantage to having it physically in front of you that you've written out. You have to think about that category and what you want to do with that. So that's very helpful.
It's a good tool to have in your toolbox. That is just a little notebook and a pen with you, or a pencil with you, and jotting things down. It's quicker a lot of times than even typing it or saying it, pulling out your phone and trying to say it or something like that. If you're on your computer, we all know how easy it is to hit the wrong button or see what's already open and get distracted. And so there is a benefit, I think, of doing some things by hand, where you're not looking at a screen that's probably connected to the internet, at least much of the time, so you're not going to hit the wrong button or see the ball game score or whatever.
I think you're right. That would be a wonderful discussion to talk about the advantages, the disadvantages of digital dependency in terms of everything, how that can actually hinder what you're trying to
Probably some combination is what most people will end up doing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Also in that section of principles, you talk about the importance of self-care, of the individual who is trying to be responsible for all these areas of responsibility. And we talk a lot about self-care. How does society's understanding of self-care, how does that compare or contrast to what you think the scriptures teach about taking care of yourself, about a biblical view of you as the one being responsible to deal with these responsibilities?
Yeah, so there's a balance here, certainly, and you can go overboard probably in either direction. But Paul talked about in Galatians about every person taking responsibility for their own actions and also caring for others around them. So it's not an either or, it's both and. And so I think what you're alluding to is, as you look at through your areas of responsibility, one of the things that people who have written more about this than I have, and that I think that they're onto something helpful here, is you can't ignore the things you're responsible for yourself. So what does that mean? It means having that time where you are We say from a Christian perspective, you're pursuing spiritual disciplines, you're interceding for yourself, for others, for those around you, you're digging into the scriptures, you're taking care of yourself physically, so that you have the energy to take care of those around you. And we also are not robots. We need refreshment. We need to be mentally charged, mentally energized. And so you simply can't go 24 hours a day or 20 hours a day over the long haul without burning out. And so you're going to need times of refreshment. And these are ways that you recognize your own finitude. We all need sleep. That's not prideful, to take time off to sleep. We need sleep. We're made that way.
Right.
And it's not just physical sleep. Sometimes it's mental recharging, spiritual recharging. It's the sabbatical principle. It's built into creation. And so I say, 6 days you are to work and 1 day take the day off, as the Ten Commandments say. I think those apply. And the principle applies at least, which is you can't work every day. You got to have a day off and a day to focus on the Lord and the Lord's people, for example. So you've got to understand that you're responsible for yourself, and you're probably also responsible for others. And so being responsible for yourself, in short, means taking care of yourself, being sure that it's like a car. If you don't take care of your car, it's going to break down on you at the most inopportune time. You got to change the oil, even if you don't think the oil needs changing. Change the oil, fill it up with gas. You might need to wash off the grime from the car, change the wiper blades and so forth. You've got to take care of it so that it's ready to go. And same thing for yourself. You got to put, you got to eat well, you got to exercise, and you have to be mentally recharged enough that you have the mental edge and the physical stamina and so forth to take care of your responsibilities.
In that regard, I think we're so susceptible, almost sacrificing our rest, sacrificing ourselves. What would you say is one of the top hindrances to us taking that more seriously? What you've said is it's not an option. You're saying it's a requirement. I've got to take better care of it. Why don't we take better care of ourselves for rest and the things we should be doing?
Well, a few things come to mind. One is we think we need to there's so much to do, we think we need to do it all.
Okay.
And we think that we need to keep working. When in reality, at a certain level, you begin to decline in productivity. And so sometimes the most productive thing you can do is to take a break, go to sleep. And your mind makes connections sometimes while you sleep. You wake up and you're refreshed and you can think about maybe a problem, the answer to a problem. Or maybe you're going for a walk, or doing something totally unrelated. And this is a well-known phenomenon that you come up with the answer to a problem you have because you're rested. Sometimes maybe it could be for a number of reasons. Maybe we think we're too important and that we have to be there, we have to do it. And circumstances are different for everyone, but Ecclesiastes reminds us that no one is indispensable, as it were. And sometimes it's just a matter of not thinking strategically about it. How many people mindlessly take out their phone and check social media sometimes there's something to be said for putting barriers in place where you say at a certain time of day, I put my phone up. That we never bring phones out at the table, or I never check my email before I take care of maybe some of the most important things of the day.
Wow. And
so sometimes it's a matter of thinking strategically about what not to do, and that gets you off track, even if you don't. It's just maybe it's bad habits we're in.
Right.
It's doing things without really thinking about what we're doing. Sometimes can keep us connected all day, for example, to the internet. And maybe we just need a break and put screens away if you're in front of a screen all day and do something different.
Right. It's just such a temptation. I want to be productive, so I have to look at my email. I have to take that phone call. But you're saying that's controlling me more than it should sometimes.
You have to know your context and know what's expected of you and know what those around you are expecting in terms of response time. But you can make a very good case that you're going to be more productive if you're not checking your email every 10 minutes and because of the amount of distractions. And especially for talking about theological work. There's something to be said for focus, for concentration, and for going as deep as you can. It's been called deep work, which I think is a helpful term. And if you're always distracted, it's going to be difficult to get into that groove where you're really, as they call it, in the flow. And at some point, the tendency to multitask is actually just not helpful, because you can't really multitask. You're actually switching back and forth really quickly. And the only thing you can multitask is listening to music in the background or something if you're not focusing on the music. But you can only focus on one thing at a time. And there's a good case to be made that the best way to make progress is to do one thing at a time and to do it well.
Right. You address that in your book, the downside of multitasking. We all think we have to be, to really be productive, I have to be multitasking all the time. But you kind of go after that a little bit in your book.
Yeah, and most people think they're good at it, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
you know, everybody thinks they're in the top 10%. But even if you are good at it, you shouldn't do it. The quality suffers. That's the issue. Even if you can do it, and I've been there, I've often viewed myself as a master multitasker. But even if you can multitask, most people think they can do it better than they can. The quality decreases, and over the long run, it takes you longer to do it. So if you weren't multitasking, the short answer is typically the quality will be better, and the time it takes you to get it done will be shorter.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Again, a good segue into. We'd like to take a few minutes for you to just reflect a little bit. If there are one or two practices or takeaways that you would want a person who both either listening to this or interacting or reading your book, what would you say? Here's some bottom lines. Here's what I want you to have seared in your mind, that if the Holy Spirit would get you to capture this, what would you say would, advice-wise or takeaways, remember this? If you don't remember anything else, remember this.
So I would probably say practically 3 things jump off, and just by way of plug, the second and third sections of the book, I do about 5 steps for each chapter.
Right.
So there is more there, but in terms of maybe the top 3 things, I would say 1, the principle of write it down, which we've talked about. So number 2, if you only had to do one thing every day to begin to be more productive, I would say use what they call the rule of 3. This is where, instead of trying to do 100 things a day, you say, today I'm going to do 3 things. And you say, no matter what else happens, I'm going to do 3 things. 1, 2, 3. And you know, that shouldn't be number 1, complete a degree or something. You know, it's what can you do today? And focus on doing those 3 things, and then work all of your other stuff around them. So answering emails, you know, going to the post office or whatever. Work that around your big 3 things, but focus on those big 3 things, and try to do 3 things every day. I found that to be very, very helpful, and other people promote that practice as well. And so that's not unique to me, but I found it to be incredibly helpful. And the other thing I would say is a weekly review.
Oh.
Put in place a weekly review. What is that? And I have some footnotes in the book to tell you where people walk through step by step how they do it. But basically, a weekly review is probably the end of the week, maybe at the beginning. You do this dumping of information from your head, from your calendar, from your to-do list, and get it all in front of you and figure out what is imminently due. What's a long-term project that I need to get moving on? What meetings do I have next week that I need to prepare for? What responsibilities do I have upcoming that I may need to think about? And so it keeps you from hopefully losing things that fall between the cracks.
Right.
And also gives you a chance to renew your focus every week, and hopefully gives you an opportunity on, let's say, Monday morning. You don't just wake up and think, okay, let me just do the first thing that comes to mind. You've got some kind of a plan where, and maybe you don't only have 3 things to do each day, but maybe 3 things to do for the week, right? So maybe, you know, I'm a professor, so maybe for the week it's grade 30 papers. For each day it might be grade 6 papers.
Okay.
You know, so for example, you can break it down that way. And so the weekly review, I think, is really helpful.
Yeah.
A way to keep you on task and not get too far behind,
Right.
and maybe even get ahead for something.
Yeah. I think too, I'm just listening to you, and it is very encouraging and exciting. I'm also thinking about your own life. You wrote this book in the midst of other books. You're teaching. You've got how many children?
4.
4 children. What are some challenges and blessings of applying that to a person looking at you? I'm thinking, how do you do it? And you're telling me how you do it, but at the same time, what are you learning in that, both personally and professionally, that you want to keep before you?
Well, one of the things that's helpful is don't look around you at other people. Everybody's situation is different. Everybody's setup is different. Everybody's calling is different. So we need to be careful about comparing and think, how am I stacking up against this or that person?
That's good.
The goal is to be faithful to what's in front of you and to do the best job you can do there. Now, just because I wrote the book, full disclosure, I don't have this all figured out. My workflow is changing. You know, there are some weeks that I don't do a weekly review, and I wish I did. You know, but it gets too busy and my time gets gone, and some of this is the principles that I know I need to be better at, and it's not as though And the other thing, it's not formulaic, and because no matter how much you plan and how flexible you are, things are going to change.
Yes.
You see that with Paul. where he has a plan in place for where he wants to go. Well, he gets thrown into prison, or he has the Macedonian vision, and things change. And so you've got to be flexible and recognize that things will change, even as you have to try to be as firm as you can to get the things done that you know that are in front of you. But you know, I'm not perfect at this. I'm a work in process, in progress, and you have some weeks that work really well,
Right.
and some seasons of life that work really well.
Right.
Here again, Ecclesiastes is helpful. There are some seasons of life where you've just got to survive. You're just trying to make it one day. You're just trying to get out of bed.
Good
You're just
word.
trying to get food on the table. There are other seasons where you can take a step back and be more intentional.
Yeah.
And so some people may be in those seasons where they're just trying to, you know, to stay awake and get everything done.
Right.
But even so, you know, in those situations where I've been there in life, some of these things probably would have helped me. But there are other seasons of life where you have a little more flexibility, a little more control over your schedule and so forth. And really, some of these principles will be particularly helpful if you have this open block of time in front of you and you're trying to figure out, I need to schedule my own time. Sometimes your time is scheduled for you.
Yeah. Right.
Now, even within that, you may be able to do some of these things within that structure, but it's going to change. It's not going to be static. It's going to be dynamic, and it's going to change over time.
Well, Dr. Crowe, I've appreciated the book. I've also appreciated, and perhaps it'll come with some of our questions, you talk about the importance of your family too, and how that can't be just another box. It's got to have a significant reflection of how you take this seriously. And so maybe we can address that. But at this point, we want to kind of open it up for questions from you all and some questions that have been submitted from our live stream as well. So why don't we start with our current audience. If there's a question anyone has about what he's saying or hasn't said yet, we want to go after. Yes, sir.
I'll go first. So you mentioned making notes and different kinds of approaches that people have to that. Could you talk about some of those and which one you find to be the most helpful?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the question is, you like
You mentioned like some specific practices.
yeah, specific practices of what to write down and categorically how to do that.
Yeah. So there are any number of methods out there. I'll mention a few of them. So one of the things I talk about in the book that I would say fits into this category is having a planner that you write in. Like, so whatever the method, the principle is you have like a weekly layout or a daily layout or maybe a monthly layout in front of you. For some people, it's just a blank page, but you're writing these three things down that we talked about. You're looking at the calendar, meetings and so forth coming up. And so what I do is, I can talk about myself and other methods, is I have a calendar on my computer, and I have a to-do list that's computerized as well. But each day I've got a hard copy in front of me that stays open all day like a weekly planner type of thing. And you see the whole week. I like seeing the whole week in front of me. So not just the day, but to have a little more context of seeing the week. And I'm looking at 1, 2, 3 for each day, my top 3 things. I'm also listing the sort of things that are more like habits or like routines that I'm trying to get done each day, and I'm trying to check those off as I go along. And I'll put meetings and other things on there as well. And so then I coordinate that with my to-do list elsewhere and so forth, but that keeps visible in front of me these 3 things. One of the popular methods out there that goes a step further in terms of analog is the bullet method, and maybe some people have heard of this. There's a whole book out there how to do the bullet method, and this is where you put everything on paper, and it's all on a blank notebook, and you have these symbols that mean it's done, it's delayed, it's put forward or so forth. And so I don't know much about the methods as I don't use it, but it's an all-encompassing system that you use. There's a planner out there for any sort of preference you have. Some of them are daily layouts, some of them are weekly layouts. I like the weekly layout as well because it's easy to review your week at the end of the week to say, here's what I did. And so if I'm writing, for example, I may know that I need to write 300 words a day. And so after I check my box, if I wrote it, I'll write how many words I wrote.
Yeah.
And so I can say, okay, this week I wrote this many words. Out of 100,000 words, how far have I made it? And am I on track? And so that's a method you can use. The other thing that I like to do is have a little notebook in my pocket. And so to capture ideas, and of course I left mine at home, so I didn't bring it with me this time. But a little pocket notebook about the size of an index card, and you're writing things down. You're writing down ideas that come to you, and you keep it with you if you're taking a walk or something, where some of these ideas might hit you. Does that answer your question sufficiently?
Thank you. Yes, sir.
In the world of
Mm.
That's all referencing some of those notes. Is there any unique contributions that you've sought to give to the Christian
Mm.
world and productivity in comparison to some of those other Christian books?
I'm not getting the question.
So how does my book differ from some of the other books?
Okay, yeah, it's a comparison. Yeah,
I guess I
why-
just repeated the question, right? I'm
Thank
supposed to
you.
repeat the question. So there are. Let me just say there are many good Christian productivity books, and my goal isn't really to replace any of them, but what I wanted to do was have as short as possible, but as thorough as possible, something that covers both the theoretical and the practical, right? So some books are really good on the practical, and some books are better on the theoretical in terms of. And so what I wanted to do was to give what are the theoretical principles, the bullet points as it were, that you need to know about to think through to get organization, but also what are some of the specific practices, like here's how you organize it, here's how you do it, so that you can give it to, I have seminary students in mind in many cases because they're often in my purview, or those who are training to be pastors or those who are pastors, something that you could give them to say, here you go. But on the other side of that, what I wanted to do as well is to add a bit more biblical theological discussion. Not overwhelmingly so, but discussing Proverbs, discussing Ecclesiastes, discussing Paul and the eschatology of Paul, and the way that the earlier books of the Bible relate to the latter books of the Bible. And so that's one of the things that I think is distinctive about this volume is the biblical theological and hopefully robustly and trustworthily theological discussion about work and about Christ's work, our work, and so forth, in as short a scope as possible, in as accessible a way as possible, 2 or 3 chapters. And also maybe correcting some of the if I can speak this way to a theological audience, some of the over-realized eschatology that is out there that says you can do it all now, you can have it all, it will all work out well for you. And Ecclesiastes, for example, says, well, no, not really. It doesn't work that simply. So a little bit of a corrective maybe in that direction as well. But then combining that theological with the practical. And so if you don't know where to start, this, I hope, would be a helpful starting point, which is I understand biblically and I understand what I can do today to get moving, combining those things.
And I think that tension you set up is so critical in the beginning between Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. That's the theological foundation to work out your daily work. So, good questions. Others that you might have? We had some submitted, correct? If I'm not mistaken, you want to tell us those, Dan? And
So here's one. Lots of productivity books focus on being productive as an individual. What advice would you give to those who are trying to sync their productivity with a spouse or their family?
okay, the question of how do we, beyond individually, how do we seek productivity with our spouses or our families? And again, that's a good segue to my question for you.
It's an important point, and that's a helpful question because you don't want to be so focused on your own productivity, your own to-do list, that you begin to neglect those close to you. Because part of the goal here is to have more time for those close to you. And so you don't want to say, my goal is to, every day from 6 a.m. to 9:30, I'm going to go exercise really. And if you have a family, that will really put everybody in your family out. From 6 to 9:30, you're going to be gone every day. That probably won't work for most people if they have children, for example. And so if you're married, talk to your husband, your wife, figure out, maybe you rotate days to go exercise or something like that. You share responsibility. You want to make the other person successful. So if you have all of these great goals, but to accomplish your goals, your husband or your wife is going to suffer, that's a conversation you need to have. And part of your goal ought to be having time for them and doing what you can to free them up to make them successful.
Right.
That's part of loving your spouse as Christ loves us. And some of your goals as well ought to be other-centered, like it's hard to quantify raising children, in terms of how do you prove success there. So one thing you maybe can do is say, we're going to take 4 fun trips this year, or we're going to do something like that. So you're making sure that your goals are not just business-oriented or self-oriented. You're putting other people in there. And so one of your goals is to spend more time with the children, or to allow my wife to have more time out, to refresh or something like that. And so clearly, if you're married, conversation with your spouse is important. Maybe if your kids are old enough, talking to them as well. And if you're in a pastoral team or something like that, having these conversations about email, for example, saying maybe let's not communicate all the time on email and expect a response right away.
Right.
And so if you want to take time back from email, maybe you all do that together. But understanding what's expected, understanding the culture around you, and helping to shape that together might be something you could do.
Good question. Any others, Dan? Submit it.
Yeah, here's another one. For people who are working in ministry as pastors or church leaders, oftentimes Sundays are their work days. So for people who are in those cases, how do you understand Sabbath? How do you rest on the Lord's day?
Okay, so the question is dealing with those of us who are in ordained ministry or full-time ministry. Sunday is not our day of rest. It's a work day. So what do you do to compensate? How do we understand that biblically and practically? How do I find rest?
I might defer that one to you. You've got a lot of experience here on this.
You wrote the book.
So I've never been a full-time pastor, so
Okay.
my answer here is a bit limited. But
Right.
my short answer is Sunday is the Lord's day. It is the Christian Sabbath. It is the day of worship and gathering and so forth, and it's an abiding ordinance is what I would say. And yet you still need that rest. And so if you're a pastor and you're preaching twice that day and you're hosting whatever, then the principle might be applied in a bit of a different way. That's still the Sabbath, but you have maybe another day off that you take to refresh and so forth. But Jerry, I'd be glad to hear your thoughts on this.
That's very much the practice for myself and others, that I want to believe I can take a rest on the Sabbath by what I'm doing, but I'm so exhausted mentally, emotionally. And I've even found that I want to take a day off rather than Monday. For example, I used to do that, and I felt like I was just giving my wife the leftovers. I still hadn't recovered. So I didn't want that day to just be a day of my recovery. So I would take a day later in the week when I'm more refreshed and able to give to her what I need to give. But I think, again, back to what you're saying, I think we're so individually driven that I've got to produce. I've got to, and almost sacrificing the very priorities that you're telling me I shouldn't be sacrificing. That I don't want my wife or children to be thinking what I'm proposing is really important. I want them to see, no, that they're as significant as any other priority in my life. And I need to plan for that by being with them and having a rest with them where I can creatively love them and be a part of their lives. So that's a very challenging thing. Yep. Anything else, Dan? Good. Anything else here that we want to make sure? This is Dr. Crowe's. I love the fact that it's, again, coming out of a New Testament professor who is writing consistently, profoundly on some theological issues. It's just a rich blessing, I think, to have a professor say, here's life, here's how this works in life. I think it's helpful, but I'm still trying to do it. The call to the gospel ministry is not just performing profound things. It's living out the call of Jesus every day. And so I think it adds to the credibility of what you teach, brother, to have you say, hey, you want a window into who I am? This is what it's about. I'm trying to work this out personally and encourage others to take the call of Christ seriously, so we have a biblical worldview, not just a truncated thing. So thank you very much, Dr. Crowe, very much. And I encourage you all to pick the copy up. It's not a thick book. It's a good, practical book to read with some great insights. So thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Hear, hear.